You can be turning to Psalm number 3.
Right.
Psalm number 3. We have, if you've been around these Sunday mornings for the last 2 or 3 years, we keep going back to Psalm 3. We've been there many times, but every time we go back, it's because there's something there that needs to be said that wasn't said last time. And it's a very rich psalm. It was written toward the end of David's life, at probably his very worst moment. To think that David even talks like he talks in this psalm is amazing. When you know who he has been, you have to say, what has happened to you, David? But then he rises to maybe the greatest heights. And so it's a psalm of very deep valleys and very high mountains. And that's why we keep going back to it. And so Psalm 3, I'm going to read part of it just for the sake of time. It begins, O Lord, and notice that the Lord is in capitals, which means actually it should have been translated I am. The I am, Yahweh, is the Hebrew there. Oh, I am. How my adversaries have increased. Many are rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no deliverance for him in God. But thou, O I am, art a shield about me, my glory, and the one who lifts my head. And we'll do the other verses as we come to them, but that's the essence of the psalm right there. I say it was his lowest point. It was, well, let me go all the way back. Just before this, I mean, just in terms of history, you have the sordid affair that David had with Bathsheba. And I say sordid, it was not merely an affair. You know, he arranged for the removal of Bathsheba's husband, Uriah. And it becomes one of the most horrible, the most sordid events in the Old Testament. And David had certainly received forgiveness. In fact, it seems as you read Psalm 51 and Psalm 32 that he's almost reached forward into the new covenant. He speaks of a forgiveness that they didn't really realize in the Old Testament. And it was total, but that was between David and God. People have tongues. And especially the people in the palace. It was before the days of cell phones, before Zoom. And so you relied on gossip. And that's worse yet. And so it was on the streets. People talked. David's not the man he used to be. And can you imagine what he did? And you know the kind of thing. And that was in the background. But it's been going on now ever since it happened in the taverns, around fires as people talked. It was there. But also David had a very dysfunctional family. He was the cause of it. He was very remote from his children. And there was one horrible event. This is getting a sordid story, but it was a horrible event. One of his sons, Amnon, raped his half-sister Tamar. Well, Tamar was the full sister of Absalom, and so Absalom got infuriated at his half-brother Amnon and looked to David to do something and make it right. And David instead ignored the whole affair. And Absalom received a bitter spirit toward David that didn't quit. Absalom began to subtly win the hearts of people. He was a snaky kind of guy. He would stand outside the courthouse, and when people came out having received a negative word from David, Absalom would put his arms around their shoulder and say, you know, I'm just a prince here, I can't do much, but if I was king, oh, you wouldn't dream what would happen. And so he built the confidence of the people. And again, the rumors and the gossip started now by Absalom and by those who believed it was time for a change. You could keep going on. Wherever you went, it was now open on the streets. Gossip, rumors everywhere. David's not what he used to be. David's an old man now. It's time he left. He's no longer the kid who slew Goliath. It's time for a change. And then even among his closest circle of friends, they turned. Some of them turned to Absalom. Not that David knew about it, but they turned. This is getting bad. And it got really bad when David began to believe what he heard. Now, that's the issue here. David began to believe what they were saying. And all the pressures that are building, what he calls distresses, and everything that stands in his pathway now, it's overwhelming. We would say today, it's getting to him. And there's an overwhelmingness about it. And right in the middle of all that, Absalom declares himself king, has a coronation, and is marching on Jerusalem. And his bitterness has risen to its full. He wants to get rid of his father, take the place. And when David hears that, he essentially falls apart. The story that he's heard, all the people repeating, and the gossip and the rumors and the half-truths, it's gotten to him. But now, if Absalom is marching on the city, it's over. He just falls apart, and he puts on sackcloth and ashes, which was the ancient Jewish way of saying, I'm a dead man, or I'm mourning the greatest loss of my life. And he goes out to the city just as a refugee, enough things to live. He goes with his private bodyguard, which seems still to be with him. But as they cross over the bridge to Mount of Olives, there's another one of Absalom's people throwing stones at him. And the bodyguard says, we go get him. And David says, no. And this tells me how low he's fallen. He says, maybe God told him to stone me. Ay vey, what has happened to this man? He's in sackcloth, he's in ashes. He believes God has authorized people to stone him. And he goes, it's interesting, in 1,000 years from when David stood there, that area would become known as the Garden of Gethsemane. And the crushing winepress, and for sure, David was being crushed, and he goes up the mountain, and when he gets to the top and he turns around, he looks over the whole city of Jerusalem as if in a farewell, but instead he sits there and writes this psalm. This psalm was written immediately after he fled the city from Absalom. There's a number of psalms that belong to this period in David's life, but this was the first one, and he's looking back over the city, and he begins. We just read the words, O Lord, I am, how my adversaries have increased. Many are rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul, notice not merely of me, he's saying they're saying it of my soul, my very being. There's no deliverance for him in God. It's interesting, the word deliverance there, if we actually just left it in the Hebrew, the word is Jesus. It's a foretaste of salvation that will come in Jesus. And that's the debt. There's no hope. There's no deliverance. There's no salvation left for this man. He's at the bottom of the pit. He's repeating as his own thought process, he's repeating what the people are saying. That's what the the people are saying this. That he's saying it as his observation. This is very important that you get what I'm saying here, that he's not merely saying it. This is what all the people have been saying. This is their rumors. This is their gossip. When they say that they're adversaries, which is a word, it would mean like an attorney, an accusing attorney, that it's as if they put David on trial, that they've put him out there as someone that's now being publicly, criminally accused. And he uses the same word, and they're rising up, and the people are saying there's so much happening in David's life, God could never be with him. No, that's over. God's abandoned him, and there is no deliverance, no salvation left for him. That's what the people were saying. David is now saying it as if it's his own observation. He's repeating their story. This is so important because we so often, we are sucked in to the darkness of what other people are saying. Okay, there's a verse which really demands an hour by itself, but it's Isaiah 8 and verse 11. And they were having trouble in the city big time. They were terrified. It was all, if this happens, if that happens. And it says, the Lord spoke to me with his strong hand upon me, warning me not to follow the way of this people. He said, do not call conspiracy everything that these people call conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear. Do not dread it. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy, not all these rumors. There's only one that you listen to. He is the one you are to fear, which is the Old Testament use of the word, and it means to stand in awe and worship. So they were worshiping, standing in awe of every rumor and negative idea. And the Lord says, no, I'm the only one that you have that reverence for. And it says, he will be your sanctuary. Isaiah had picked it up into his own spirit, the despair and the fear of the people, and it was now becoming his own. Though really it was their story, but he was accepting it and becoming one with it. And that points out something you would never realize. I was in Moscow once before the wall came down, and it's the most sad, it's worse than sad, it's a city of depression. And the people line up outside of blank doors, 4 or 5 across for nearly 2 miles, because they've heard a rumor there's food out behind that door. And there, many times there's only enough for 100 people. And they stood there, and I would walk down the street and look at them. They were like robots, just staring. And when the guy came out and opened the door, they went in and just grabbed whatever and paid for it, of course. And they came out, and then the guy came out and says, no more. And nobody complained. They just turned around like robots in utter despair that could not be made worse or better. It was just their state. And as I was walking to my hotel, I felt despair. I felt utter depression. I felt, I won't say suicidal, that would take it too far, but I mean, I'd never felt such darkness. And in my hotel room, I was saying, what's the matter with me? What's happened? And I realized I had picked up the spirit of despair and darkness on the streets. And as soon as I realized that, this particular scripture came very much alive. No, I am not part of that. My whole response is to the God of light and so on. But it's a reality. And it's happening so much here in the States right now that we are picking up other people's feelings, and we think they're our own, and they're not. They will be if we accept them, but they're coming. And this is what David was doing. He has picked up what's happening in the city and he's forgotten who he is. And therefore he says, God has abandoned me. Why would he say that? Because he believed what the people were saying, that there's no hope for him, there's no salvation for him. And so, yeah, maybe God says, stone me. That's it. He'd accepted the darkness, you see. And in Young's literal translation, which I keep telling you to get, he puts it, how have my distresses multiplied? Many are rising up against me. The word distress, which is the exact Hebrew word there, it's a very strong word in the Old Testament. Let me give you what it means. Distresses, it means a narrow and very tight place. You could say it's a canyon that you're walking through and your shoulders are touching both sides. But as you keep walking, it's getting narrower and narrower, so you can hardly move. There's certainly no room to turn around. That really is the exact meaning of the word. It's a narrow canyon that becomes tighter and tighter. Your shoulders are touching. There's nowhere to turn. I can't get out. And that produces a paralysis of the mind. You know, you just can't think. I don't know where to turn. It also produces panic. I can't turn around. I can't get out of here. I'm stuck. And so there's fear in the word. There's anguish, anxiety. It's translated once in the scripture, which tells me sometimes what it really means, as having a pebble in your shoe, but you can't get the shoe off. And it's there. You can't take a step without it's there. And that's the element. I can't move forward, okay, but it also means there's pain of this thing. Every time I put my foot down, I'm feeling it. I'm unable to get out of the shoe. I've described it as claustrophobic. You're in a crowded room. You're pressed against each other. Okay, it's Macy's on Black Friday, you know. Yeah. You're hemmed in would be another good word. But that's a panic, I can't get out. That is really what we're talking about. And then he says that the things have risen up. And that really means exactly what it says, but just to pull it out, it means that it is risen up in front of you and it's immovable and I can't get around it. So there it is, the impossible in my life. There it sticks in front of me and I can't get around. It's risen up against me. It's an obstacle that's too strong for me. Can't get around it. And the context, as I said a few minutes ago, is of an accuser. It's a court-appointed adversary. And it is saying of my soul, it's talking about my very being, that God has forsaken me there. And the fear of that, with David, it came to the fear of the future. In fact, further down in verse 6, when he's got the answer to this, says, I will not be afraid of temp, which suggests he was before. And so the fear of an unknown future, the distresses have with them the fear. I not only can't get out of this, but I can't avoid where we're going. And so he's accepting the accusation. He's accepting it. This is the way it is. Now, I want to take time on that. Do you know why you have emotional bouts? Ever studied it? Do you know how long an emotion lasts? Just You get angry or even joy, but we're talking negatives here. You get any, I'll say anger. Do you know how long actually that lasts? I mean, if you just take a picture of your emotion, it lasts for about 50 seconds, and it would die after that. It's got nothing, unless, unless you keep putting wood on the fire, and you do that in terms of a story that you tell yourself. What is it that caused the anger? Well, now let me tell you the story. I'll tell you what caused this anger. She said this and she did that and he did that. Can you believe that? And the story fuels the anger. It keeps going now. It keeps going. And the longer you tell the story to yourself and to others, so the anger continues. That's the life of the emotion. And that can be applied to any emotion. You see, our thoughts are not like little white clouds that scud across the sky. We would tend to think of our thoughts in that way. Thoughts just pass through my head. And we don't believe they have any attachment. They're just passing through my head. But again, speaking scientifically, every thought you think has substance. It's a thing. It takes up space in your being. And it not only takes up space, it actually is deposited in various parts of your body. It can actually be registered. If you can picture it as it's happening, you can actually see it on a screen. It's a thing. It's that right there is really saying it's a substance. Someone said it's real estate. You thought something. Well, it actually took up a physical place in your being. And at the same time becomes an energy source of whatever that thought is about. It becomes energy that affects every cell of your body at the speed of light. You think something and every cell in your body is immediately part of that think. So if someone says to you some tragic news, in one instant, you will have a physical response to that. You might even develop ulcers in that very minute, which is a reality. People have had a heart attack just by hearing a sentence, because a thought is not only substance, but it is a source of energy that goes to every cell in your body. And you've got 75 trillion cells in your body. They've all got your name on them. And when you think a thought, everyone is immediately engulfed in that thought. I was going to say think about that, but yeah. So our life, the life that we live, our everyday life, the way that we think, if we're always sad, always see the negative side, that is a public record of the way we think. The way we think produces that in our bodies. That has a mystical way of making, that's the way we do our work, that's the way we approach life. And so we become a person who's always the victim, we're always, that is a public record of the way we think. We have produced it. And now it's on show. And so we tell ourselves. And of course, all this happens so quickly. Have you noticed how quickly you can tell a whole life story just in a split second in your head? It's amazing. I say again, at the speed of light, we tell the story. And have you noticed how you tell the story, you finish it, and then you start all over again, as if I've got to get this right. And if you're telling the story to somebody else, if you notice those people, they've just told you the story, and then they start telling you again. You just told me what he said. You just told me that. And you told me how mad you were. Why do you have to tell me a second, third time? That's the way it works, the story. And we go to bed with it. We dream of it. We can't sleep at night. Get pain in the neck, yearly. It's our story. So we got it. It's our story. Trouble is, it's rarely true, really. There's always a bit of truth to it. I mean, I guess the guy did say that, and you were hurt, but you don't really know much about him to know why he said it. You don't. There's a lot here you don't know anything about, but you've accepted it as the ultimate, final truth. This is what happened in that moment, and it's all depending on how it affected me. But as I say, it's a lot of half-truths. Then have you noticed over about a week or two, we exaggerate, and it becomes much worse. It sounds more like World War III now than actually what happened. But that's what we do. And we believe it. It becomes truth to us, which opens a door for further lies from the liar that is only too quick to join us in the story. And the story gains control. It really did the moment we began to repeat it, but it now takes control of our life. I liken it to a hurricane coming across the Gulf. You really have to live in Texas or Louisiana or Alabama to know what I'm talking about there. But these hurricanes come across the Atlantic, and when they hit the Gulf of Mexico, which is just down the road from where we're sitting, the heat of the Gulf causes them to become stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, and they can massive overnight. And well, whenever I read that or hear about it happening, I think of what I'm talking about now. That what just was a little tropical depression in your head has now become a Cat 5 hurricane. Because it gains as you talk. And you'll always have willing listeners. They love to hear gossip, and so that you can have an audience. And of course, that really, they're not going to go there now, but that's how sin began. Satan came to the couple in the Garden of Eden and told a story. There's a story about, how you poor victimized people, that you could be more than you are, but now just follow my instructions, and there's a story. It's for good reason he is called the prince of the power of the air. He is the transmitter of lies, which we pick up, and that often is the case. Nothing happened except we pick up something and start talking about it as if it's truth. Okay, and of course, all commercials on TV are part of this whole network of, but anyway. Do you remember James chapter 3, verse 2? He's talking about our talk, our conversation. And he says that if you control your tongue, the way you talk, and of course that begins in your head, all conversation begins in thought form. He said, if you're able to do it, he says, you're then able to bridle or bring under control the whole body. That's what I just said. You've got 75 trillion cells that make up your body. It's what you think and what you say that controls it. And so he goes on, you put bits in a horse's mouth so they'll obey us. He says, it's not merely a matter of obedience. That little tiny bit in their mouth directs their entire body. It's the direction. And he said, that's the tongue. And he says, look at the ships. They're carried through storms by a little tiny rudder. He says they're directed by a very small rudder wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. He controls it through that little rudder. He said, that's your tongue. Whatever's smashing against your life, you walk through it with your tongue. That's the medium of strength. Doesn't matter what is facing you. Your tongue, it controls your body, which includes my health, it includes my mentality, my outlook, certainly includes my spirit. Or again, he says how we could look at California, a great forest is set aflame by such a little spark. And he says, that's the tongue. You can set things on fire for good or for evil with your tongue. It's a very world of iniquity. And trouble is, our story that we tell it could be 40 years old, and by which time you have forgotten every detail. You're left with what you believe really happened. And that's why you look the way you do at 40 years, because it's been cursing your body, it's been dragging you down, it's been, I'll leave it. You get what I'm saying. We have guided our entire life by that rudder of what we talk about and believe and say is final truth. That's it. Every time we tell it to ourselves or to others, we relive the event. That's daft, I mean, the scab was healing, and then we can't tear off the scab. Let's do it again. Let's feel the blood run down our arm one more time. Come on, let's feel the pain. That's what it is when you tell it again, the story. And now, let me go back to the beginning. It would have died in 50 seconds without you keep telling this story. That's what keeps it alive. So anger, 40-year-old anger, because she just kept telling the bitterness that then develops with that, and feeling the hurt all over again 40 years later. Believe me, I've been a pastor long enough to know this happens. Shame. What people live with visible shame, and when you find out what happened, it was a lifetime ago, and yet they've kept telling themselves the no good that they are. And of course, the worst stories of all are those we tell about the future, because they haven't even happened. Then we become authors of fiction stories. And if you noticed, we want to prove that our story is true. So in order to prove it's true, everything that happens in our life, we relate it to the story. And we say, see, I told you that, that's it. Why have I taken all that time to say that? Because that's what David was doing. He's telling a story. Do you see how he was doing that? He's telling a story to God. How my adversaries have increased. Have you noticed, Lord? Many are rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul, no hope for him in God. Story. It's his report. He's going over it. This is what they're saying. This is what they're saying. It's a lament. It's a long complaint. It's pouring out his pain and his misery, hopelessness as he sees it and is heard it. And it's a terrible story. I mean, David, do you realize what you're saying here? Because it's a story of God's faithlessness. There's no hope for him, no salvation for him. What do you mean, David? Why even bring that up? That's a terrible thing. You say that God has abandoned you. He's broken his covenant. He's left you to die. He told Shimei to stone you. Come on, David. What kind of story are you telling? What kind of story is anybody telling when you begin to put it on paper and analyze it? But there's something good. He's telling it to the Lord. I think it was the first time he had. I think up until now he's been telling it to himself and listening to others. But now he's saying, "Oh Lord." Now that changes everything. And what I like about David all the way through his life, he doesn't pretend to be a spiritual giant. Yes, I know, it's terrible words. I stand back and say, David, is this really you? But in another sense, I'm so glad he did that. Because you see, religion has taught us dishonesty. Religion has said if you show any sign of being miserable, then there's lack of faith. So we've got our way of meeting other believers. We put on a rigid mask of happiness, and we're falling apart inside, but we daren't tell anybody because they will think then we've lost our salvation or something. Because religion is all phony, it's all out here, it's all fake. But this is the real McCoy. He's not pretending to be a spiritual giant, and he's not ashamed of telling the Lord, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm seeing. Thank you, David. Thank you. He's telling the story that is fueling his fear, but he's telling it to the Lord, which includes the Lord into it now. He's included the Lord into his conversation. Now that is what has made it different. Oh yes, he's still telling us that he's afraid, that he's frail, that he feels shattered, he feels lonely, forsaken. He tells us he's falling apart. He's facing a future of loss. He's lost everything. He's lost everything that he's left with sackcloth and ashes. His palace, his wealth is all left behind. And he's lost his son. He's lost his family. Yeah. Possibility of death. But it's no longer going over and over to himself. He's now opened it up and said, this is how I'm feeling. And that is so important. And I've said this too many times to repeat it in detail here. But on the road to Emmaus, that's the classic one. When Jesus comes alongside and he says, you look sad. You know, if I was the risen Christ, Lord of heaven and earth, I think I'd approached him differently, saying, okay, guys, relax, it's me, you know. Instead, he won't stop there. They've got to tell him. They've got to open up their story and let him inside their story. Then he can talk to them. And so he says, well, what's the matter? And they says, are you the only one in Jerusalem? You know? And he says, what things? And he brings them to pour out their hopelessness, their despair, what looked like the end of their life, coexistent with the crucifixion. And then he says, boy, you are thick-headed guys. And he begins, and then he says, did not our hearts burn within us? But it started right here where David is, the honesty, what to most people will be terrifying honesty, to stand before him and say, I'm not the spiritual giant. And then it says Selah. You've noticed that in the Psalms, that little word Selah. It's a great word. It means, okay, I said it. Now, let's think about what I just said. Pause. Pause in the presence of God. Stop. Listen to what he's saying. Think about this in his presence. Or you could say it means to regather, refocus, recalibrate your heart to God's heart. I suppose you could say it means get new lens for your glasses. See things straight. Selah. Stop. I have just said this. Maybe that's the first time he really heard it. Because when you're telling it to yourself, you're so immersed in it, you don't really, it's just, but now you've opened it up and you've dared to tell him where you're at without any apology and without any kind of spiritual foo-foo that's going to make it look better. You just, here I am. And that's the only person God can deal with, because he only deals with truth. And all that other religious nonsense only separates your mind from his. And Selah means, what have I just said? And let's refocus. What are you saying about what I've just said? See, David's in an awkward situation here, and I think it's worth at least mentioning, because I think there's many persons who might have this same problem. David was consequencing. You know what I mean by that? Yes, he was forgiven of David and Bathsheba's sordid affair. Incredible. And forgiven to the point he was walking on the ceiling, and blessed is the man who, but he did it. I mean, in history, it happened. And it happened at the center, right? The king of Israel. You throw a stone in the water, you can be forgiven if it wasn't supposed to be done. But I'm sorry, the stone still went in the water. And there's ripples now going all the way to the shore. And what the people were saying on the streets, they've got their own problems, but he did it. He did it. Sorry, David. I mean, but your consequence, this is the consequence. And yeah, you have messed up your family big time. You do not get a father's award. You're the poster child for a father that screwed it up. Now, Absalom is doing what he's doing. He's got his real problems. Absalom's got problems. But you kind of are part of those problems. And I want to emphasize it that he is consequencing. There's a consequence to every action we take. There's a consequence to every word we say. And so many people think, well, that's it. I deserve this. No, hold it. David consequenced, and this was the consequence of a screwed up underbelly, if you like. It's not the David we know about too much, but this is the consequence. Well, what do you think God, who is love, does about that? You really think he sits back and says, okay, guy, you made your bed, now sleep in it? He might say you made your bed, but now he says, let us sleep in it. If you are consequencing, then let me tell you, he is consequencing with you. That's the amazing thing. The evangelicals love that word backslide. It turns up every Sunday sooner or later. Well, if you backslide, not that the word is mentioned in the New Testament, by the way, it's totally an Old Testament word. But okay, if you like the word, you can have it. If you backslide, he backslides with you. That's shocking, isn't it? That's love. I mean, go back to the one we always go back to, the sheep. When the sheep went into the wilderness, it backslid. He was having a jolly good time in the flock, and then the stupid idiot went into the wilderness. It backslid into the... And the wilderness was the consequence of its stupidity of following every stray piece of grass until it lost them. So what does a shepherd do? He consequences with the sheep, stands in the same place as the sheep. Same dangers, same everything. He's right there, as lost as the sheep, except he's not lost. He knows where he is. If you, I don't think anybody listening has had an affair in which you ended up murdering the husband of the lady. But should you be here listening, that you'll pay consequences. There'll be but he joins you and makes your shame his shame, makes your position his position, and walks out of it with you. That deserves an hour. And what David did at this point is recognize that. I have to believe that's part of why he was in such desperate straits, because I brought this on myself. But at that moment, he realizes, as Selah, he pauses, he brings everything into the line with the heart of God, and he realizes he's with me in this. And sometimes there's that. But David said in other places, my heart is fixed. And if I take out the picture we just looked at, that our words are the rudder of our ship. Well, in old times, when they had sailing ships and you had the big wheels that connected with the rudder, I don't know if you know this, but in a storm, the steersman would tie himself to the wheel with ropes, so that as the rudder wants to go every which way, he's tied to the wheel, and it's got to go where he says it's going. Yeah. And what does David do here? He is tying himself, or recognizing he is tied to what God says and not what the people are saying. He's tied to what God says, not what he said about himself. And in this moment, as his rudder is about to go all over the place, he realizes he's tied to his wheel in God. And God's voice mocks the voice of all the people, dismisses them. And at that point, David changed his story. Now it could be the most important thing that I'm going to say, because it's different. He changed the story to see everything that was happening from God's point of view, which is the only truth. And he says, but, that's the great word. That is, I'm not denying that the people are saying this, but it no longer means anything. Because there's a greater story that cancels the lesser story. But you, oh, I am. That's what they're saying. But now I am choosing. But you contradicts and changes the entire story. And let me tell everybody listening to this that those words, but you, contradicts and changes every story in your head, which amazingly will change the message to 75 trillion cells, which will change the real estate of thoughts in your life, which will change the shape of your body, which will change the shape of your physical shape of your face, and cause you to move into a realm of Holy Spirit reality. Just those two words, but thou. But now, what does that mean? Well, of course, it means that I no longer camp at the story. It's no longer my story that I just can't wait to tell you. That's over. I don't fret over it. Which means there's a lot of questions that I no longer ask. Because the way he was telling the story, he would be saying, why didn't I see this coming? Are you stupid, David? Why didn't you see this coming? And then, if only I had been a better father. That really is at the heart of it. And I'm the king. I've failed. I'm the pastor of this people, and I failed. Those three questions could take a lifetime of going over and over and over and over. I've met pastors that have said it for 50 years now because of a mistake they made 50 years before. The moment you say, but thou, it's the end of that. It's the end of this camp. I'm not around this campfire anymore. Which means we no longer ask those questions, but thou. Nor, and this is very interesting, you stay here a long time, he doesn't question God. He doesn't say, why did you let this happen? He didn't even say, have you abandoned me? Doesn't bring that up. That's interesting. Whereas what I say to everybody, never, ever, ever ask God why. Because there's no answer to that. The answer's inside the heart of God. And the question rather is, what are you being to me right now? Not why. Nor does he argue and debate the accuser. He doesn't say to himself, as if, well, I'm not as bad as that. You shouldn't be as hard on me as that. There's no mention of that at all. Nor does he rebuke the devil. He doesn't. Some people think that's the answer, to rebuke the devil. David doesn't even bring it up. Doesn't even turn inside to say, okay, I promise myself I will not say negative things again. Doesn't say that. You can't tame your speech. Nor does he promise that if God gets him out of this, he'll do this and that and the other. I hope you're taking note of this, because these are the ways people come right up to this and then miss it because of all these silly things they do. But maybe the most important thing is he doesn't pray. Good grief. He doesn't pray and ask God to intervene. He doesn't pray and ask that God will come and do something or even become something. That's amazing. He just simply makes a declaration, a bold one. And notice, I think you've got it now anyway, but thou, and I've said before, thou is Old English and doesn't appear in our modern translations, but it's the most intimate. You is the plural of thou. If you've ever had lessons in English, they would have taught you that in England anyway, that conjugate the verb, I am, thou art. And then the plural is you are. Well, we've dumped thou, it's gone now. And so there's no word for intimacy. It's all y'all, it's use. But thou. David was speaking most intimately. You in the most intimate way. That is, he hadn't found a doctrine that got him out of this. He hadn't found a formula. It was a thou, intimate, the I am, the living person, the unchanging, the faithful, the true, the all-sufficient I am. And that I am himself is the shield, the glory, the lifting of his head. That's so important. Because, right now I'm addressing 100 things that I've heard people say, thinking they're getting themselves out of the dilemma. No. It's not that you've found a doctrine, a formula. It's you've woken up to realize and remember your relationship, this intimate relationship. And think about it, you are my shield. Well, if you are my shield, then it means you do not give me a shield. Do you understand? It doesn't say you give me the shield. That'd be neat. But the moment, if I say that I give to Marshall my New Testament, well, it leaves me and becomes his, which means the whole thing is a separation now. Whereas if I would say, I am your New Testament, it means you'll never again turn to the New Testament without me, because I am it. See? So he doesn't give you a shield. He is. He doesn't give you something called glory. He is. He doesn't give you some formula that makes you happy and lifts your head. He is it. That's what it's saying. He is it. He doesn't give things. There's no such thing as a love that God gives you. He is the love. He doesn't give you joy. He is the joy. Because that's union. That's what we're called to. This is the life. We're so one with him that he is the gift as well as the giver. I could say this is the essence of worship. Worship is primarily 24/7. It's not something we do in church gatherings. It's the way we talk. We're back there again. It's the way you think is worship. Worship is acknowledging the centrality, the allness, the I amness of God. And it is saying that we love him, we adore him, we trust him. Well, you do that with words, with thoughts. Then when we come together, by the inspiration of the Spirit, we might move into song, because song elevates language into another dimension. But if you haven't been talking it and thinking it all week, it's phony idiocy to come and sing it on Sundays. Worship is a lifestyle. It's one, and that's what David is doing. And he says, you are a shield about me. You know the amazing thing about this? That he's just got through saying there's no hope for him in God. And the next heartbeat, he says, you are a shield about. Shouldn't there be some due repentance in here? Couldn't he be miserable a bit in the middle and say, I screwed up? No, that was invented by religion. If you get anything out of this, from the deepest depths of darkness, he went straight into the heart of God and says, you are my. There is no waiting period. There's no, I don't care. I'm looking at all your faces on the screen. I'm looking at the people here. I have no idea where you're at. Honestly, I don't. I don't know what goes on in the deepest depths, but if you find yourself in the middle of depression and darkness, and there's no way out, from that feeling, from that middle of that situation, go directly without a breath to you are my. Because there is no in-between. The in-between may be getting used to it, but in fact there is no in-between. You are a shield about me. And notice, about me. Shields are not about. They are in front of you. That's what shields are. You hold it in front. He says you're a shield about me, round about me. Meaning you shield me at the back and the sides and the front. You shield me. And what is a shield? A shield absorbs what's being hurled at you. It depends on the method of warfare, but in David's day, a shield absorbed the arrows. So they didn't get to David, they went into the shield. And what he's saying here, that you are the shield, you're the one, all this that they're saying about me, all the poison arrows that they're hurling at me, you absorb it. And it becomes yours. And you dismiss it. I don't have to deal with it. But I love the next one. He says, you are my glory. Now, I can understand each one of these, but David was king, and all the glory of being a king, he has just left it behind in the palace. Indeed, Selah, think about that. Are we talking money? Well, we know from various other parts, David had lots of money. Well, it's all in the palace. He's lost it. Absalom will come and use it. And his royal attire, which is the human way of displaying glory, which with the crown and the ermine capes and everything else, and all the way through human society, we all have certain things that show our glory. The stripes on a soldier's uniform, you know what I'm talking about. The glory, that was all, but it reflected who he was. It was, hear me carefully, the glory of anyone is the opinion that someone else has of them that has now been woven into cloth or beaten into golden crowns and silver and whatever. Does that make sense? Glory, in terms of any human glory, we understand it as being the opinion of someone else. That's why Someone has to give that stuff to you. You are coronated when a crown is put on your head and the cape around your shoulders and the orb in your hand and so on. It is given to you. And when in the armed forces, you go and you receive your medals and honors and things around your neck, and someone gives it to you because it's the opinion of someone about you. That's your glory. And a king especially, that it's the opinion of the nation. He's the pastor of the people, and it's in their opinion. Yeah, he sure has lost it. The opinion of the people is, you're finished, man. You're done. There's nothing left to the old man. You're like a junkyard dog. Let's throw stones at him and get him out of here. Yeah. And he says, you are my glory. That is, I am now clothed in your opinion of me. I now wear the crown of your opinion. I can spend a lot of time here. You know, I'm wrapped in your opinion of me. That is my honor. That's my majesty. And I don't care if they've taken everything else away. They've taken away my medals and they've taken away my crown and they're using my money. But at my heart of hearts, nothing has changed. Your opinion of me is what now I'm left with? No, it's what I started with. You're my glory. I am radiant with your presence. And remember, when he said that, he was still wearing sackcloth. So this is radiance in sackcloth, you know. And he says, you're the lifter of my head. Which, I mean, when I'm depressed, well, again, of course, 75 trillion cells. You're depressed up here in your head, so what happens? Your body goes down, and you show it. You hang your shoulders, you stare at the ground, you can't look people in the eye. All our invisible emotions have a physical expression. And so the down of the head, the shame, I'm no good. Because in religion, that's counted as holiness. The more you can tell everybody, especially God, that you're worthless and you can't lift your head, then the more holy you are. But of course, that is one of those damnable lies that we were raised with, because he says, you, O Lord, you lift my head up under my chin. You lift my head up. You put my shoulders back. But if he lifts my head, where do I find myself looking? In the eyes of the person who's lifting my head. One of the underlying structures of the whole Bible is righteousness. And righteousness has nothing to do with behavior. Righteousness doesn't mean you've piled up a list of things that are good that you've done. Righteousness is a very ancient word, especially in English, but in most languages, it's a word that means a right relationship. It means face to face. So when it spoke of Jesus as God the Son, in the beginning was the Word was God, and then it says in our Bibles the Word was with God. But the Greek there is pros, P-R-O-S, which means face to face. And so the Holy Trinity is described to us as dwelling in face to face, in this perfect relationship, which the English word is righteousness, which means it's balanced. Another way of looking at righteousness is the scales that balance. I don't want to pursue that, but that's face to face. So when he says he lifts my head, it means he's bringing me at least into the realization of righteousness, which of course is the last thing that these people are talking. They've said there's no salvation for him in God. Well, he says he brings me face to face. He brings about a perfect balance that when God looks at me, he looks at himself and his righteousness face to face. Or the word that goes with that, of course, is union. We're union with him. All that he is, we are. For me to live is Christ. And we were created for that posture. And in Christ, it's been realized. And David anticipated that. And he says, you did this. You are a shield around me. You are my glory. You are the lifter of my head, the restorer of my righteousness. See, the liar always pushes us down. And Jesus always, we've talked about this before. Andrew's talked about it too. I think you did once too. That, in fact, it doesn't matter. That when John saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, and Jesus lifted him up. But in order to lift him up, Jesus had to come down and lift him up. See, religion says, good, that's where you belong. Grovel, stay there. Tell me you're unworthy. The God of religion loves it when you spit on yourself. But Jesus comes down right where we are and lifts us up face to face. That's what he does. We could multiply those ideas. David said that's it. He changed his story. So every time he hears what they're saying, and any time it rises by habit inside of him, he counters it. You are my, you are my, you are my. That's interesting. He doesn't deal with the story they told. He doesn't deal with his own story. He ignores it and replaces it. Never go and try and change your thinking. Replace your thinking with God's thinking. Yeah. So then he sums it up now. He said, I was crying to the Lord with my voice. That is, when he began to tell the Lord his old story. And he says, and he answered me from his holy mountain. Think about that, Selah. Yeah, he had told him. And what was the answer? The answer was the realization bursting on David, you are my. And then he says, I lay down and slept. Good grief, man. Absalom's marching on the city. You got out by the skin of your teeth and you're only a very short distance from the city. It's time to run for your life. He says, I'm taking a rest. In Young's literal translation, the I there is emphatic. We can't do it in English unless we just say it emphatically. But in the Hebrew, and so in Young's literal translation, it says, I, the two I's. He said, I lay down. Meaning, yes, you got it right. The man who just said that, I'm the one. I laid down. That battered man is now in such perfect peace, such rest, that there's nothing else to be added to it. I go and rest. And then he says, he awoke and was sustained, felt like $1 million. Now he shouts, I will not be afraid of 10,000 people who have set themselves against me. Before he says, many are those who said, oh, there's so many, they've risen up against me. There's no way past them. Now he says, my, you are my, you are my, you are my. Therefore, I will not be afraid of 10,000 people who have stood in my pathway and rise up against me. So 1,000 voices tell their story of doom. He's got one voice, but it's one voice that is absolutely one union with the voice of God. And therefore his one voice drowns out 1,000 voices. No wonder, because in Revelation it says the voice of the Lord is the voice of many waters. Yeah, that kind of drowns everything out. And that is his voice. And so I say it again, he ignored. Please, I've tried to say things that he didn't do, because they're all the things we usually do. And one is, we don't ignore, we try to fix it. We say, I won't do that again, and we keep going back there. No, David totally ignored it and simply replaced a new story without reference in the old story. He ignored and he replaced, and he had a story that was instead of the other story. And then he looks at the future, and it's interesting. He says, arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. Now listen, remember where he is on the top of the Mount of Olives, looking over Jerusalem, just now with the telegram in his hand that says Absalom is marching on him, right? We couldn't be closer to the beginning of this story. He says, for you have smitten all my enemies on the cheek. You have shattered the teeth of the wicked. Salvation, that word that they said is salvation, belongs to the Lord, not to you guys. Your blessing be upon your people. So before this thing has really started, he's saying, you have finished it. Do you remember we talked about it before, how Jesus addressed much of life by saying, the hour is coming, but it now is. Yeah, this has got to unfold. A lot would happen with this story. It takes up 2 or 3 chapters, and 2 or 3 Psalms too. So this is right at the beginning. But David is saying, this is the way it is. This is where it finishes. And even so, it now is. It's already a reality in my heart. And notice where he says, you've smitten all my enemies on the cheek. You've shattered the teeth of the wicked. That was a Hebrew expression to describe talking. Because if you're talking to me and I punch you in the mouth, that makes talking difficult. But then if I break all your teeth, well, you're done. And that's the Hebrew idiom that is here. And so the Passion Translation has that, what is it? You have broken or breaking the power of their words to hurt me. And he captures what that means there. So there it is. There it is. And I've said a lot, and I hope you've picked up the bits and pieces of it. Just in what I've said, if we face loss, and most of us at some area we face loss, nothing as dramatic as this, but it doesn't need to be dramatic to create a story that will last forever. Overwhelmed, that's probably a word that we can relate to better. Become aware of storytelling. Really, really, really. Become aware of it, because we're not aware of it. We are not aware that we are telling ourselves a story that we believe is the absolute truth. And usually, if not always, it's a story that we've forgotten to open up to God, which means we're telling a story that is purely, it's just us in this story. God's not in our remembrance. He's there, of course, but we're not acknowledging him. That's big. Be aware of how you're guiding your emotions, your mental, physical health, not let alone the spirit that's going on. And remember to go straight with boldness to your true self in union with Christ. That's probably the hardest thing for the religious. Because with the religious, all that, you know what you have to do? Raise your hand, come forward, stand there like an idiot, say this prayer after me, try to do the best, No. straight out from the deepest depths, straight into, you are mine. And then rest. And don't feel illegal when you rest. Rest. And let there be lots of selahs in your life. Lots of selahs. When it begins, stop. Did you hear what you just said? Is that really the truth? All the way through to shout, but thou. Okay, I've landed my plane. And so, now the blessing of God, who is almighty love, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, his enlightenment overshadow every ear that listens and every heart that takes it in, that we shall rise in but thou and become the people we truly are in Christ. So I bless you, and so it is. Amen.